amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee print offered by Mr. Banks of Indiana, identifier L_China.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order.
Gentleman from Michigan reserves a point of order. Gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 5 minutes on behalf of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. China poses a grave threat to American freedom, and it is critical to our nation's future that we work to counter the growing menace of the communist regime. China views our nation's students as a prime target for its propaganda, and we can't sit by while they exploit our students and infiltrate our institutions. This committee should take action to protect students from a nation that unleashed a deadly virus that has taken the lives of over 600,000 Americans. My amendment would prohibit any student who receives a Pell Grant from conducting research associated with or on behalf of entities that are affiliated with the government of China or any of its subsidiaries. Under no circumstance should Americans have to see their taxpayer dollars flow to programs that can be used to support an oppressive regime. My amendment would ensure this is no longer a possibility under the Pell Grant program. This amendment takes an important step to protect students, taxpayers, and the country from the communist threat posed by the Chinese government. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Gentleman from New York, Mr. Morelli. Gentleman from New York, Mr. Morelli. Gentleman's still on mute, I believe.
My apologies.
Okay.
First time with Zoom. I do, Mr. Chair, I move to strike the last word and speak in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman's 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, sir. The amendment, in my view, is a bad faith effort on the minority to score political points by prohibiting students from using Pell Grant funds to conduct research connected to China. The bill we're considering today would spend billions of dollars to make needed and critical investments in higher education, including the Pell Grant program. Pell Grants are the cornerstone of financial aid from the federal government to help millions of low-income students afford to go to college every year. So Pell Grants are not used for research of any kind. They're used to cover cost of attendance, including tuition, fees, books, supplies, housing, and food. So, this amendment is just an attempt, it seems to me, to further an agenda to attack China rather than engage in anything meaningful. I think all of us, and I have the privilege of serving on the House Armed Services Committee. I think we're sobering to the challenges of China in the many ways that they seek to compete with the United States. There's a place and there's a time for having that conversation and to try to figure out how to engage meaningfully with the Republic of China as we do with the rest of the global community. But there's no place for that kind of language in this bill as we push to make billions of dollars in investments in higher education and in young people who desperately need a college education. So I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment. And Mr. Chair, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Are there others who wish to speak to the amendment? If not, gentleman from
Mr. Chairman, I
Michigan.
withdraw my point of order.
Gentleman from Michigan withdraws his point of order. The question now is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks. All in favor of the amendment will vote aye.
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 All opposed, vote no.
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 Those appear to have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
The gentleman from Indiana asked for a recorded vote, which will be rolled as previously stated. The next amendment I have listed is to be offered by the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Cawthorn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment, Cawthorn RAMD_08 at the desk.
Gentleman has an amendment at the desk. Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of the substitute to the committee print offered by Mr. Cawthorn of North Carolina, identifier RAMD_08.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order.
Gentleman from Michigan reserves a point of order. Gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Cawthorn, is recognized for 5 minutes on behalf of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the whole committee. Mr. Chairman, Americans have been horrified over the last month as we have witnessed the dangerous and inept withdrawal of America from Afghanistan. Even now, despite President Biden's claims to the contrary, American citizens and green card holders, and most importantly, our allies, are still trapped in Afghanistan. The Biden administration, if left begging the Taliban to allow them to leave. Mr. Chairman, this is an embarrassment. It is also something that schools and institutions of higher education may be confronted by this fall, and they should be prepared to respond. Institutions may have students or employees who are evacuated following the fall of Kabul. They may have students or employees who are had friends or family members evacuated. They may have veterans of Afghanistan's war suffering from trauma in the aftermath of the American collapse. I do not support the tens of billions of dollars proposed to be spent under this bill on programs that have never produced the outcomes promised by their supporters, or on new initiatives that will surely disappoint as well. However, if these funds are going to be spent, we should ensure that the institutions are using their resources to respond to students and employees affected by the events of the last month. This amendment is straightforward. If institutions have students enrolled or employees who evacuated from Afghanistan on or after August 15th, or who were affected by the evacuation, they must set aside a percentage of their school construction or teacher and school leader grant funds to address the needs of that population. The percentage needed will vary widely. So under my amendment, the institution would work with the Department of Education to determine the appropriate percentage. I urge all my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Does anyone seek be recognized on the amendment? Gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, I think all of us, in terms of our offices who, got the calls from constituents looking for help for people trying to get out of the country over the last, actually, couple of months or so, I think certainly would agree with the basic premise that, schools and a whole host of institutions are going to be now dealing with a population that went through a highly traumatic experience, and that we obviously need to make sure that the help is there for everyone's benefit. Reading the gentleman's amendment, though, I was trying to just sort of determine, why the parameters were put around who gets help, because it's limited to only those evacuees on or after August 15, 2021. I think we all know there were people in the process of evacuation before that. But even more importantly, it's only limited to people who had valid U.S. passports at the time of their evacuation or who were approved for entry into the U.S. under the SIB program. The gentleman in his opening comments correctly stated that there's going to be individuals with green cards, permanent resident visas, who are also going to be part of this population. That's not included in the amendment here. In addition, there was a whole other cohort of individuals, the P1s and P2s, which again, I think many of our office who handle State Department issues became very familiar with, which was a wider population than just those who are eligible for special immigrant visas. These are people who work for NGOs. These are people who, had a year or two of demonstrable help that they gave to U.S. Forces that were over there, as well as other personnel, and that were also included in the evacuation, and appropriately so, because those are individuals who are going to be just as at risk as anyone else who cooperated with U.S. forces there. So again, the scope of the amendment, I think, is not adequate in terms of what I think we need to deal with. I would also note that we have other programs from the federal government, Title IV, in particular, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which provides funds for health and safety of students that are there. The budget that we just passed about a month or so ago, that Congresswoman DeLauro led the charge on, had a very healthy increase for Title IV that was in there, and that does not have any of the limitations that the Cawthorn Amendment has in terms of both time and legal status of people who may need help. So I think that, again, we're going to take this on as a nation. And I think that the budget that we passed out of the House provides the support in the correct bucket, as opposed to going into school construction funds to deal with this. I would just also note, as long as we're on the subject, that on page 95 of the bill, we included a provision to address an issue which the Iraq and Afghan war veterans and a whole host of other veterans have long complained about, which is the calculation of public service loan forgiveness eligibility. The bill copy provides a provision which will allow overseas deployments, the months of overseas deployments when student loan payments are deferred, to be counted as qualifying payments and allow folks to get their loans discharged, again, who are wearing the uniform of this country and are serving overseas. The Department of Defense calculates that that's roughly about 10,000 overseas service members at any given time. Their average student loan debt is $13,000. And so what this bill will do is, correctly recognize that when they're overseas, that period of time when they're there should be counted towards their public service loan trigger to get their loans discharged. So the bill is, part of the bill within our jurisdiction dealing with student debt is addressing, the great service of the people who went through not just the evacuation since August 15th, but their time overseas, again, representing and defending and protecting our nation. So again, I would urge a no vote. Certainly happy to talk to the gentleman in terms of other ways that we can, again, get the full scope of all the people that were going to be evacuated, which is a larger group than what is defined in the amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does anyone else seek time on this amendment? If not, gentleman from Michigan,
Draw the point of order.
the point of order is withdrawn. If no one else seeks recognition, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from North Carolina. All in favor of the amendment will vote aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed, vote no.
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 Noes appear to have it.
Mr. Chairman, it's shocking to me that my counterparts in this committee don't want to help the people who fought beside our valiant men and women who fought in Afghanistan. Therefore, I would like to request that the noes, yeses and noes, be recorded.
The recorded vote is requested, and that will be rolled with the others. The next amendment is to be offered by the gentleman from North Carolina. Do you have an amendment at the desk?